You are listening to Radio Aula Mundi.
Hi there, wherever you are. I'm Marco Rixecker, a freelance writer, reporter, producer, teacher, translator, tour guide, poet, singer, and songwriter. I speak several languages, and I'm the creator and founder of Radio Aula Mundi, an evolving podcast station where no language and all languages are spoken. It's a multilingual mix of music, poetry, lectures, languages, interviews, documentaries, recipes, and a lot more, co-produced with the students of the Aula Mundi International Cultural Center. You can find us on radioaulamundi.bandcamp.com, podcasts.apple.com, Spotify, YouTube, Breaker, Player FM, Facebook. Search Radio Aula Mundi. The following narrative includes excerpts from a collection of testimonies and interviews entitled Let's Talk About It Anywhere in the World, where it is all about people's voices, accents, and speech patterns, hand in hand with my own personal anecdotes and observations. In addition to that, people are free to introduce themselves and speak their minds openly in their respective, often indigenous languages and dialects without any paraphrases or expectations. So, let the story go on from there. To me, National Geographic magazine has always been a source of information for all kinds of topics and projects. And with the arrival and development of new technologies, including podcasting, one of those features a National Geographic explorer by the name of Topher White. I'm having coffee while I'm listening to the show. And so it takes a while to wake up to the notion that someone like Topher White would resort to cell phone technology to record the sounds of rainforests all over the world and simultaneously detect and denounce illegal logging activities. At the beginning of the 21st century, the latter keeps wreaking havoc in places like Indonesia and the Brazilian Amazon. So I'm intrigued and conclude that it would be interesting to speak with the man behind such a project. Topher White's company goes by the name of Rainforest Connection and is located in the Silicon Valley in Palo Alto, just south of San Francisco. And it is easy to find a contact page and reach out. So Topher White's project goes beyond detecting illegal activities like logging. It's also about people's enjoyment of the sounds of the rainforest anywhere in the world. And that's why raising awareness for the importance of climate change and environmental protection is another concept behind the whole project. These are some of the topics Topher White and I explore as part of a conversation from different places in the world. When we connect online, it's obvious that Topher White is a busy man. He has actually forgotten about our interview. When I send him a message asking if he's still able to enter our scheduled chat room, he replies offering me his apologies. He's driving to his office, but is going to pull over to do the interview while he is sitting in his car. I find that kind of original and go for it, even though it reduces the quality of our connection. But it takes away nothing from the importance and intensity of our conversation.
So my name is Topher White. I'm the founder of Rainforest Connection. I'm currently speaking to you from a car in Palo Alto, California. Where I grew up. We grew up in San Francisco. But our activities at Rainforest Connection are based all over the world. So a lot of this originally came out of my interest in being able to build tech and doing that in different sort of environments and wanting to find a way to use recycled technology to build kind of IoT, Internet of Things devices almost 10 years ago. But the real sort of application of this came from visiting the rainforests in Borneo in Indonesia back in 2011, where I visited a gibbon sanctuary. I always loved gibbons; they're the loudest animals in the forest, and it was really based upon a problem that they had. This one issue around illegal logging, and difficulty to detect it and get there in time, that the solution was really built for them. So it was really just about helping this one organization out, for protecting gibbon habitat or even just gibbon rehabilitation habitat. And then it was only after building it and seeing it work for them that the elements around climate change and the rest sort of came into it. So that was kind of what motivated from the start. But of course, once you see that something you build is useful, even if there's a lot of work it takes to make it work well and to find the right partners for it, you kind of get hooked, right? And we're all kind of involved in addressing climate change at this point, not just Rainforest Connection, but all of us. Because if it's not about mitigating it, it's about adapting to it.
What makes rainforests so special?
Rainforests are really a bastion for biodiversity. So it's really a sort of a unique tropical environment that is so intense and so concentrated in a certain way that you have this amazing overflowing of biodiversity. They also store a tremendous amount of carbon. The temperate forests that you'll find in North America, perhaps even, so just the northern hemisphere, are in many ways they hold more carbon, but they are also very biodiverse, but they don't have the same sort of intensity of sort of biological concentration that you get in the tropics. And so, yeah, I think they refer to rainforests as the coral reefs of the land, or they refer to coral reefs as the rainforest of the sea. But in many ways, it's a different kind of forest. The ones up here, it's a different experience. Everyone thinks of forests in America and Europe as like quiet, peaceful places. That is not the place. That is not the case in the rainforest. It's a vibrant and in many ways aggressive environment.
What has been your closest call so far?
Oh, I mean, there's often times where we're with people in conflict situations, but far more of those occur when we're not there, right? So it's the people who kind of stay there on the ground all the time, our local partners. So indigenous tribes or NGOs or communities, they're the ones who, their day to day is often in a state of threat. So there's definitely been situations in Brazil and Peru and elsewhere where it feels like we are witnessing the conflict that you see on the edges, but ultimately we aren't the face of the local struggles. The local people are, and so either people don't know who we are, or they shouldn't know who we are, and they get, and like the pressure really falls on locals. And even it's especially with COVID and the increase in deforestation, we're seeing a lot of upticks in violent crime. Around gold mining, around illegal logging operations. It's almost professionalized, and it's really terrible. I mean, like partners, there've been assassinations, there've been murders. I was just talking a few minutes ago about one of our close partners in Brazil, who act as a bridge between like the local communities and the Atembe tribe. We just found out within the last few days that he was captured and assassinated by illegal settlers. So this is very, very real people there on the ground. For the rest of us, we're lucky to know them. They're the ones who bear the risk.
Could you please define bioacoustic monitoring?
So so much can come out of sound. So when you're in the forest, I mentioned how noisy it was earlier. It truly is. There's a lot happening there. And that's partially because sound travels really well through the forest. So you can't see 5-10 meters in front of you, but you can hear things happening a mile away, especially those low frequencies. And so that's evident just from the way the animals themselves assert themselves. So we decided to build a technology that would capture that. How can we use sound to pick up what's happening at greater distance? And so that's the sense of this device. It is essentially a device that sits in the treetops. It used to be made from smartphones. These days you make them from other materials that run the same software. They capture all the sounds of the forest. They stream it up to the cloud in some cases. Some cases they analyze it on the device, and they can pick out the sounds of threats like logging trucks or chainsaws or gunshots or human presence. And then they can send alerts to local groups that we work with, where they can then use our software to understand how to gauge a response and hopefully get there in real time. And additionally, I mean, that of course is the hardest part. These are people who put themselves at risk. It's our charge to make sure that they are getting support that they can, and for us to continually try to improve the technology, not rely just on this one solution to be able to do it. And then over time, this technology also became useful for, as you mentioned, sort of bioacoustic technology. So uh, being able to listen not just to threats, but also animals. And what can the animals tell us about themselves, about the ecology, about the health of the forest, and ultimately sometimes even about the threats themselves. So can we use the sound of the forest to measure uh, how strong and how vibrant the forest is? And additionally, can we detect threat, the presence of a person or a predator in the forest just based upon the sound itself?
What's the coolest sound you've heard recently?
That's a good question. So in our case, there's a artificial intelligence like neural nets that we're trying to continuously improve, especially our science team, to be able to pick out more species and threats. Um, wow, I think that some of the coolest sound. I always loved gibbons. I think gibbons are what brought me to the forest the first time. Just loving them and wanting to see them in the wild. They have the most amazing calls. That'll always be one of my favorites. But I got to give credit to some of the birds you'll get out of Peru and Ecuador and the rest. Like some of these robins will really sing out. It sounds like a Star Wars laser battle sometimes. But yeah, there's always something new to discover and appreciate about the forest. The birds will be very creative, and it is great to stop and listen sometimes. You're correct. You're correct. There's always something happening. You know why? Because like also like life itself is always making some kind of sound. There's some kind of vibration. There's some kind of acoustics coming out of anything alive, and that doesn't necessarily have to come only from living things. You get it from winds. You'll get it from the rustling of it. There's an extent to which Earth is never fully silent, um, and I love that you noticed that.
Cell phones and technology, are they friends or foes?
Well, I think that technology or cell phone technology, technology is a friend, but how you define technology can matter a lot too. I think that the pace of cell phone adoption around the world, you mentioned there being communities that aren't well, where cell phones haven't really made a big impact, but that's fewer and far between. So there's way more communities that have cell phones, even if they don't have cell phone service, they still have the devices themselves. Um, and they use them in all the ways that we do as well. Uh, and that happened very quickly, and that's one of the reasons that our technology is useful because again, we were it's necessary for the people who use our system to have some understanding of tech and receiving things on apps and knowing how to read a screen, and that's where there's the groups we get to work with. So we're rarely in the presence of uh, of groups that aren't somehow technologically inclined. But all this happened quite quickly. You can go to these communities and talk to people about like what technology means. Uh, one of the stories. I mean, we were talking to an older woman in one of these communities once, and she said, "Oh, technology is really terrible. Like nobody talks to each other anymore. Like we don't have these communities." And we're like, "Oh yeah, cell phones are pretty rough." She's like, "No, not cell phones. Like refrigerators. Refrigerators ruined everything. It used to be that we go off and have a hunt, and um, and then we come back and there'd be a feast and everyone would get together. But now everyone freezes the meat and we don't get together anymore. So there's always going to be some kind of disruptive technology that in many ways can have effects that not everyone appreciates. Um, and I think cell phones have been probably one of the most intense we could have possibly imagined. But there were many before that too.
Especially in this day and age, how important is conservation actually?
It is. It's critically important for a number of reasons. There's ways in which we don't really know what our future looks like without the system, without the services that thriving ecosystem provides. We are starting to see these things break down. This doesn't mean the end of the planet. Doesn't mean the end of humanity, but it may mean a very different future for us we won't have the chance to regain what we didn't appreciate at the time. Um, but even so, there's just extinctions have occurred at various points over the course of our planet. But the amount of biodiversity we have on Earth right now is a real treasure that we would be very, we would make a very poor decision if we didn't try to preserve. This is one of the most interesting moments. This is probably the most interesting ecological moment since humans have existed on Earth, simply because there's stress from climate change. We're seeing species adapt, and within those adaptations, there's just hundreds of millions of years worth of trial and error and like real genius and intelligence. That's if we don't look carefully and we don't capture it, we will have missed out on a serious investment that our planet made over that long. So I think it's important not just for us to preserve biodiversity, because again, we're moving in a direction where we're going to lose biodiversity, and we have to do our best to protect it. But even just paying attention to what's there um, is an important part, I think, of being a human right now on Earth, because in the future, people won't have what we have right now, and we have to capture to make sure that we can pass some of that on and protect some of it for the rest of them. But either way, appreciate that you live in this era, because the future will look quite a bit different.
How will the story go on from there?
Well, I think it's a lot of it's about trying to improve the tools. Cell phones are fantastic little computers. We still want to use those, but those should probably operate in places where you don't need a really intense device like these Guardians we put up. So when you're putting a device up in the rainforest, it's almost like a satellite. Like you don't want to have to go back and you're climbing a tree and you're putting up in a remote place. It's a terrible place to try and install technology. So those are ones you have to be really careful about. But there's many other situations where we should do bioacoustic monitoring, or we should do protection that's far closer to say society or civilization or villages. In those cases, cell phones work great because people can be there to replace them and things like that. So I think we'll find the right balance over time. As we push into more remote places, it's important for us to have more control over the tech. That's where we moved away from cell phones, but I think you'll see them coming back into the fold over the next year or so.
Where do you draw the line between science and politics?
Well, I think even conservation and activism, I would sort of separate those as well. I am fascinated by science. I'm not an ecologist biologist, although I'm lucky to work with some of the greatest ones on our team and our collaborators as well. My background is much more in physics and software engineering. Like I love the basic approach of science. And I think that within the problem solving element of things, whether it be engineering or physics, the rest, you want to find like agnostic solutions, ones that aren't based upon an ideology. It is extremely easy to get swept up in the dogma of beliefs or understanding the abuses that occur that lead to environmental destruction. We're all involved in it, and so it's hard to blame anyone in particular, except for a few people who are really, really pushing things. But society as a whole is largely driving these things, and so the solutions that are going to trump this aren't going to come from blame or conflict. Although certainly there's plenty of conflict in the work that we do. It has to come from the solutions that we've seen work. The same processes that swept cell phones across the world was a real kind of need, a constructive need people wanted to use. Those are going to have to be the same forces that help us to address climate change and help us to address environmental destruction. And that's where ingenuity really matters. I remember being at an event once, and one of the best things about the work we do is that I think it's pretty hard to do the work that we do, and we do get lots of credit for it and undue credit, and that's nice. But I always appreciate when people give like the right really pointy criticism that when you look at it, they must be right. The criticism of our work is absolutely correct. One of the ones that we heard was from an old guy. He walked up, he's like, I think the work you're doing is great, but I just want to let you know that as long as your work is about stopping somebody from doing something, it's never going to be able to grow on its own. And the more I think about it, the more I realize that he's right. We can't be about trying to stop or prevent environmental destruction. We have to find a constructive way in which the environment is protected by virtue of its relation to us. And I don't know if that's a philosophical change or market-based change or the rest. I'm not a very wishy-washy kind of person in these ways. But yeah, the environment can't just be protected. It has to be constructively grown alongside us.
During our conversation, Topher White and I also discussed some more trivial topics such as food, for example. What is the recipe for your favorite Peruvian dish?
I I gotta say, yeah, I think the guinea pig is I don't know if it's definitely most memorable to be both raising them and eating them. Um, let's see, favorite dishes out there. Yeah, Brazil nuts are really great actually. Um, Brazil nuts, especially the ones you get down like the southern Madre de Dios, they're really wonderful. So I wouldn't call it I wouldn't necessarily call it a recipe, but for an ingredient, a particular Peruvian one, that's the one for me, I'd say.
By the standards of the 21st century, could Topher White be called an influencer? And so to me it seems quite natural that I'd ask him for advice and recommendations. So, which advice would you have for a student in your field?
Um, I think there's often a sense that people want to build things from scratch, and there's value in that, especially from a scientific standpoint. But my approach is to tear things apart. I think tearing things apart is really fun and interesting. Plus, you get to build on top of some solutions other people have in the past. So I think that things apart, take especially taking machines and electronics apart and finding a way to reapply them is even more satisfying. Um, because then you're part of an existing product. The other thing would be to, if you have an idea, uh, talk about it less and build it, right? Because talking about it gets in the way of building it. And I don't just mean that in like a, well, what I mean about that is that, talking about it gives you a sense that you've accomplished something. And it's not bad to seek feedback, but sometimes it might be bad to seek feedback. It gets in the way. It gives you that sort of dopamine hit that you've accomplished something because people are like, oh, it's a good idea or it's a bad idea or whatever it happens to be. What you really gain more from is building it if you can. Um, so yeah, that's the thing. That's what I would go for. Feel be, enjoy the building, enjoy the failing, and enjoy tearing things apart. And that's only if you want to be, uh, you know, the type of engineer that I like and that I am, which is not necessarily the best or the only way to do it.
Postscript. As part of my conversations with people, I often have them ask questions, either specifically for someone I know I'm going to chat with in the near future, or broadly for anyone I might speak with anytime, anywhere in the world. As a result, two questions are available for Topher White. The first sounds outright existential and comes from a tile artist from Chicago by the name of Jim Barker. Parts of what he does consist of filling potholes in the streets of Chicago with tile mosaics. And when I describe his work to Topher White, he repeats a couple of times, "That's so cool, that's so cool," before he answers Jim Barker's question in the most honest manner.
Yeah, I guess. Well, probably my general question is is I guess it's kind of maybe about leaving your mark. Like, that's part of my thought process. I got into ancient history and loved it and whatnot. And you really, what's driven home is you're only on this planet a very short amount of time. And so that's part of my motivation too, is I work as much as I can. I'm trying to get as much done as I can in my the time I have here. So maybe I think it would be something like about that. It's like you're all these folks are passionate about what they do. It's like, what do they ever think about what they're leaving behind, and how and that's not they want to be remembered, but how what they're doing um is going to be looked at in the future? Kind of a vague question, but I mean that how do you leave your mark? I mean, does that even play into your? Does that not even concern you? Or I'm curious about when you're gone, how have you moved the needle? Or do you ever think about that? And if so, how, what, and what would make you happy?
So I think we worry a lot now around like how about about what the future will think of us. And and I think a lot in the environmental movement, people often talk about what will the future think of us. And I appreciate where they're coming from on that. But I don't think there's a lot of evidence for us being judged in the long arc of history. If I'm being perfectly honest, I think that in the future, people will look back. They won't necessarily appreciate as mentioned before, some of the things they don't have access to. What they'll miss is they'll look back and they'll see a group of people who were able to achieve so much, get almost anything that they desired. Like, you could decide to be on the other side of the planet, and with a certain income, which is clearly not everybody can have it, but like, you can get to the other side of the planet in a day or two. In the future, these things might not be possible. So I think that in the future, they'll look back and they'll be like, wow, what a time to be alive. But given that, if it's a value that we hold, if we're afraid of what we're doing to the planet, we have to live kind of for ourselves and our own sense of self-worth. So I do not fear that we will be judged by the future. And even if we are, that's not the point. The point is, how can we judge ourselves in the right way? I think that we live at a certain pinnacle, maybe not the only pinnacle, but a certain pinnacle of capability based upon the amount of energy that's available to us right now. We understand the consequences of that, but it's incumbent upon us to do everything we can to lift as many people in the world as we can up, because the great ideas and the great genius can come from anywhere. And within that, I hope that some of the great ideas come out of this era, not just the greatest expressions of excess. In the future, people will love the fact that we were excessive, the same way that we love, Venice at its height, or the Renaissance, or the great works of art from the past. They'll look back at this moment as that. I don't think they'll look at us as irresponsible. But if we think that we're irresponsible, it's well worth diverting some of our resources towards lifting genius, coming up with the best expressions of solutions that we can appreciate ourselves.
The next question for Topher White comes from a poet. Needless to say that there is a lot of imagery in it. A woman by the name of Dorian Laux has a question about windows. And Topher White's answer sounds almost as poetic as the question, but it is based on his travel experiences.
What is the window you most looked out of? And of course, it can be a real window or it can be a metaphorical window.
Chickens are everywhere. Actually, that really sort of, that's symbolic as well. I think there's an extent to which we're all chasing a certain standard of living, but that's not necessary for us to be happy. And I think we all kind of know that. But somebody recently, also from the East Bay, like her, was mentioning to me, what if what we associate with poverty is actually just the most long-standing way of being sustainable? And I don't want to glorify, poverty or not having the same resources that we have. I don't want to glorify it, but I don't want to pigeonhole it into feeling like it's not enough for us. So around the world, we in the US we wear shoes, but around the world, I'm pretty sure there's more people wearing rubber boots or flip-flops than shoes, and that's enough. And that's not just because it's warm; it's because that's kind of the way things are. So, what the standard that we'd associate with progress might also just be a blip in the human experience. Whereas the vast majority of the world's population is living in a fairly recognizable state of progress that we don't think is high enough, but is still there. So again, traveled all over the world to all these different rainforests, got to know the communities, and I would never ever think that it was enough. But I'll tell you that my team, they would always get annoyed at me because what I'd come back with was really wonderful pictures of families and chickens and dogs, you know, and they're like, why aren't you taking pictures of monkeys and forest birds? But because that's the human experience, and you'll find that that it is quite consistent around the world.
Speaking of poetry, that's how my conversation with Topher White ends. Like with so many other people, I give him a poem to do a reading performance of. In this case, the author is Seamus Heaney, the Nobel Prize-winning Irish poet, which, I believe, matches Topher White's profile perfectly. And so there he is. Topher White is sitting in his car and gives me the most poignant reading performance one could imagine under such circumstances. And it triggers a spontaneous follow-up question that is all about the daily routine of a National Geographic explorer who doesn't shy away from danger and adventure to do the best he can to make our planet a better place. And so, the story goes on from there.
Anything Can Happen by Seamus Heaney, 1939 to 2013. Anything can happen. You know how Jupiter will mostly wait for clouds to gather head before he hurls the lightning? Well, just now he galloped his thunder cart and his horses across a clear blue sky. It shook the earth and the clogged under the earth, the river Styx, the winding streams, the Atlantic shore itself. Anything can happen. The tallest towers be overturned. Those in high places daunted. Those overlooked regarded. Stropbeak's fortune swoops, making the air gasp, tearing the crest off one, setting it down bleeding on the next. Ground gives. The heavens' weight lifts off Atlas like a kettle lid. Capstones shift. Nothing resettles right. Telluric ash and fire spores boil away.
As an explorer, you know that anything can happen. How do you feel about it?
As an explorer, it's not that anything can happen. It's that we have a more restricted view of what anything is. There's a limit to the absurdity that you take on when, as an explorer, you are the one driving the course. Like when you're deciding where to go, even if you don't know the destination, you kind of limited your own. You kind of limited the scope of what you're willing to see or able to see. That's just a function of our own minds. So exploration versus observation, or exploration versus passivity, I think that you'll find there might even be more new to see in the latter.